Have you ever wondered what power lies hidden in the hands of the person you walk past every day? The person who pours your coffee, who wipes down your table, who you see but never truly notice. We build empires of steel and glass, sign deals worth billions, and chase ambitions that touch the sky, but sometimes, the key to it all, the very soul of our creation, is scribbled on a paper napkin by a hand we never thought to shake. This is a story about one such napkin, one such hand, and a man who had to lose sight of his entire $10 billion company just to finally see what was right in front of him. It began, as many important things do, not in a grand boardroom, but in the quiet corner of a struggling cafe, with the smell of burnt coffee and shattered dreams hanging heavy in the air. Elara moved through the clatter and steam of the daily grind, like a ghost. Her shoulders were perpetually slumped, a habit learned from years of trying to make herself smaller, less visible. Her uniform, a drab brown apron over a faded black t-shirt, was a second skin, a camouflage against a world that had long since decided she wasn't worth looking at. She was 24, but the exhaustion in her eyes belonged to someone much older, someone who had seen too many sunrises after sleepless nights spent worrying about rent, about her mother's medical bills, about the art supplies gathering dust under her bed. That was the real Elara, the one who lived in the quiet moments between taking orders and clearing plates. The artist. Her fingers, chapped from hot water and cleaning solutions, still knew the graceful dance of charcoal on paper. In her tiny, cramped apartment, sketches of breathtaking landscapes and soulful portraits were hidden away in a worn portfolio, a testament to a dream she had been forced to defer. Here, in the cafe, her canvas was a cheap, disposable paper napkin, and her medium was a leaky ballpoint pen borrowed from the counter. She drew without thinking, her hand moving with an unconscious grace. Swirls became birds, lines became faces, simple shapes blossomed into intricate patterns. It was a nervous tick, a way to channel the creative energy that had nowhere else to go. Her manager, Marcus, a man whose ambition had curdled into a permanent sneer, saw it as a sign of laziness. He'd often snatch the napkins from her, crumpling them in his fist. "If you have time to doodle, you have time to clean the grout, Elara," he'd hiss, his voice a low, grating sound that made her stomach clench. So she learned to do it in secret, her back turned, her movements quick and furtive, a tiny act of rebellion in a life defined by compliance. Today, the air in the cafe was even more tense than usual. A group of men in exquisitely tailored suits had taken over the largest table, their presence sucking the warmth out of the room. They spoke in low, urgent tones, their faces grim. Laptops were open, displaying sleek graphs and corporate logos that meant nothing to Elara. She only saw the tightness in their jaws, the way they barely touched their expensive pastries. At the head of the table sat a man who radiated an aura of immense, weary power. This was Khalid Al-Jamil, the CEO of Al-Jamil Holdings, a global conglomerate with a valuation that flirted with $10 billion. But today, he looked less like a titan of industry and more like a king surveying a crumbling kingdom. His company, his legacy, was stagnating. The brand felt old, disconnected. They were losing touch with the next generation, and his board was growing restless. The multi-million-dollar rebranding campaign was a disaster. The presentations from top-tier agencies were a parade of soulless, clinical designs that spoke of profit margins and market shares, but not of people. "It has no heart, Ferris," Mr. Al-Jamil said, his voice a low rumble of frustration as he pushed a glossy proposal across the table. "It's cold. A falcon should be majestic, a symbol of vision and freedom. This looks like a corporate weapon." Ferris, his sharp-suited second-in-command, sighed. "Khalid, it's modern. It's minimalist. This is what connects with today's market." Elara approached their table, her coffee pot held like a shield. "More coffee, sir?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Al-Jamil waved a dismissive hand, not even looking at her. His eyes were locked on the sterile, geometric bird on the page, a symbol that was supposed to represent everything he built, but now felt like a stranger. As Elara refilled their cups, her hand trembled slightly. The weight of their stress was palpable. She backed away from the table, retreating to the relative safety of the service station. Her fingers found the familiar comfort of the pen in her apron pocket. She pulled out a fresh napkin. While the men debated focus groups and demographic appeal, Alara began to draw. She wasn't thinking about them, or their company. She was thinking of the stories her grandfather used to tell, of the noble falcons that soared over the Arabian deserts, their wings catching the golden light of dawn. She thought of freedom, of grace, of a connection between the earth and the sky. Her pen moved, a fluid, unbroken line. A wing curved with protective strength, an eye held a glint of fierce intelligence, and the body was formed from a single, elegant swirl that suggested both movement and stillness. It was a falcon, yes, but it was more than that. It was a story. A feeling. It was everything the men at the table were searching for, captured in a few cents' worth of ink on a piece of flimsy paper. The discussion at the table grew more heated. Voices were raised. Mr. Al-Jamil finally slammed his hand down, the sound making Alara jump and smudge her drawing. "Enough!" he declared, his face a mask of thunder. He needed air. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. As he turned, his eyes, burning with frustration, fell upon Alara. She was hastily trying to shove the napkin into her pocket, a guilty look on her face. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice sharp. He strode over to her. Before she could react, he plucked the napkin from her trembling fingers. He held it up, his eyes scanning the simple drawing. For a fleeting second, the harsh lines on his face softened, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. But the pressure of his failing company, the weight of his board's expectations, and the sheer absurdity of the situation, a CEO looking for answers in a waitress's doodle, crushed the moment. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. He turned back to his table, holding the napkin aloft for his colleagues to see. "Perhaps this is our answer, gentlemen," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Forget the multi-million-dollar agencies. Our new corporate logo, designed by, what is your name?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Designed by the waitress. A little bird." How quaint! The men at the table, eager to break the tension and curry favor with their boss, let out a series of polite, sycophantic laughs. The sound was like glass shattering in the quiet cafe. It echoed in Alara's ears, each chuckle a physical blow. Her face burned with a shame so intense it felt like a fever. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She stood frozen, her eyes wide with humiliation, the pen falling from her limp fingers and clattering to the floor. The laughter was a wall of sound, pressing in on her, confirming every fear she'd ever had about her art, about herself. That it was childish. Silly. A waste of time. And now, her foolish little habit had been exposed and mocked in front of the most powerful men she had ever seen. Marcus, her manager, had been watching from the counter, his eyes gleaming with malicious opportunity. He saw his chance to impress the wealthy clientele while simultaneously putting Alara in her place. He stormed over, his face a mask of theatrical outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, snatching the napkin from Mr. Al-Jamil's hand. He didn't even look at the drawing, he just saw a violation of his rules. "Wasting time, disturbing our guests." "I am so sorry, sir," he said, bowing his head obsequiously towards Mr. Al-Jamil. Then he turned on Alara, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for her. "You are a waitress. Your job is to serve, not to draw. You are paid to be invisible. Is that so difficult to understand? This is the last time, Alara. One more mistake, and you are out." He tore the napkin in half, the sound a final, brutal punctuation to his words. But he didn't throw it away. He crumpled the two pieces and shoved them into his pocket, a trophy of his authority. The laughing stopped. The men at the table looked uncomfortable now, the casual cruelty of the moment laid bare. Mr. Al-Jamil watched, a flicker of something, regret? Annoyance, crossing his face? He had instigated this, but the manager's petty tyranny was distasteful. He was about to say something, to intervene, but his phone buzzed with an urgent summons from his office. The moment was lost. "We're leaving," he announced curtly. His team gathered their things, avoiding Ilara's gaze. As they left, Mr. Al-Jamil gave her one last look, a look she couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't anger. It was something more complex, a look of profound, unsettled weariness. He had come here seeking clarity, and had only created more mess. Ilara stood amidst the wreckage of her dignity, tears blurring the faces of the remaining customers. She felt the familiar sting of worthlessness creep back into her heart, a cold and unwelcome guest. The crumpled pieces of her drawing in Marcus's pocket felt like pieces of her own soul, torn and discarded. She finished her shift in a daze, her movements robotic, her mind a numb buzz of shame. She didn't draw again for the rest of the day. The pen felt heavy and alien in her pocket. The simple joy she found in those fleeting moments of creation had been poisoned, and she wondered if it would ever return. That night, the storm that had been brewing in Khalid Al-Jamil's mind finally broke. He sat alone in his penthouse office, a cavern of glass and chrome that overlooked a city glittering with a million lights he couldn't see. The view, which usually filled him with a sense of pride and accomplishment, now felt like a monument to his failure. Spread across the vast mahogany desk were the final logo proposals from 3 of the world's most expensive design firms. They were slick, professional, and utterly dead. One was a cold, angular falcon that looked like a military drone. Another was an abstract ANJ so stylized it was illegible. The third was a word mark in a font so minimalist it was devoid of any personality. They cost a fortune, but they were worthless. They were designs born from market research and algorithms, not from passion or purpose. His father's voice echoed in his memory, a voice from a time when Al-Jamil Holdings was just a small trading company run from a dusty office above a spice market. "Our name is our bond, Khalid. Our symbol, the falcon, it sees far, it is loyal, it connects the earth to the heavens. It is our promise." Where was that promise now? Lost in a sea of spreadsheets and quarterly reports. He ran a hand over his face, the exhaustion a physical weight on his shoulders. He reached into his suit jacket pocket for a pen and his fingers brushed against something soft and crumpled. He pulled it out. It was one half of the waitress's napkin. He stared at it, his mind flashing back to the cafe, to the cruel laughter, to the girl's stricken face. He hadn't realized the manager had torn it. A pang of guilt, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through his frustration. He smoothed the delicate paper out on his desk, placing it next to the glossy, $1,000,000 proposals. The contrast was jarring. The napkin was fragile, imperfect, stained with a tiny drop of coffee. The drawing on it was just a fragment, the curve of a wing, the hint of a powerful chest. It was incomplete, yet it held more life, more energy, than all the polished designs combined. He remembered the manager, Marcus, storming over. He had snatched the napkin from him. He had torn it, and shoved the pieces in his pocket. Both pieces. A sudden, inexplicable urgency seized him. This wasn't just about a logo anymore. It was about the casual cruelty he had witnessed and participated in. It was about the look in that girl's eyes. He picked up his phone and dialed his head of security. "I need you to get me the full name and address of a waitress who works at the Daily Grind on 6th Street, he commanded, his voice firm. "Her name might be Ilara. And I want to know everything about the manager, a man named Marcus. Do it now." He hung up and stared at the torn piece of paper. The single, flowing line of the wings seemed to mock the rigid, calculated geometry of the corporate designs. In that simple curve, he saw not just a bird, but a story. He saw the soaring spirit his father had spoken of. He saw connection. He saw heart. He realized with a sickening jolt that in his moment of petty frustration, he hadn't just laughed at a waitress's doodle. He had laughed at the very soul of his own company. And now, he had to get it back. The next morning, the polished doors of the Daily Grind swung open to reveal Khalid Al-Jamil, his face set with a grim determination that made the morning commuters pause. He strode directly to the counter, his expensive shoes silent on the worn linoleum. Marcus was there, preening over the espresso machine. He saw Mr. Al-Jamil and his face lit up with a sycophantic grin. "Mr. Al-Jamil! A pleasure to have you back, sir. Your usual table is ready." Mr. Al-Jamil ignored the greeting. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice low and cold. Marcus's smile faltered. "She, sir? I'm not sure. The waitress. From yesterday." Elara. Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to a kind of oily confidence. He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Ah, yes. The artist," he said with a sneer. "Caused a bit of a scene, didn't she? Don't you worry, sir. I've handled it. She won't be bothering our valued customers again. In fact, she's no longer with us." He said it with an air of pride, as if he had done the CEO a great service. A dangerous stillness fell over Mr. Al-Jamil. His eyes, which had been weary the day before, were now like chips of obsidian. "You fired her?" "It wasn't a question." "For the good of the business, sir," Marcus said, puffing out his chest. "We maintain a professional environment here, a professional environment," Mr. Al-Jamil repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Is that what you call public humiliation and petty abuse of power?" Marcus paled. "Sir, I want the other half of this," Mr. Al-Jamil said, placing his piece of the napkin on the counter. Marcus stared at it, his mind racing. He remembered stuffing the torn pieces into his pocket. He had meant to throw them away, but in his smug satisfaction, he'd forgotten. They were still in the pocket of yesterday's trousers. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Don't lie to me." Mr. Al-Jamil's voice dropped to a near whisper, yet it carried more menace than any shout. "My head of security has been looking into you, Marcus. He tells me you have a history of this sort of thing. Skimming from the register, bullying your staff. You think because you manage a small cafe, no one is watching." Marcus began to tremble. "And I want her address." "Now, I can't give out employee information," Marcus blustered, trying to cling to the last shred of his authority. Mr. Al-Jamil simply pulled out his phone and made a call. "Get me the franchise owner of the Daily Grind." "Yes, right now." A few minutes later, after a brief, brutal conversation, a terrified franchise owner had emailed Elara's details directly to Mr. Al-Jamil. Marcus stood by, his face the color of spoiled milk, as the CEO turned to leave. "Oh, and Marcus," Mr. Al-Jamil said, pausing at the door. "You're fired." He didn't wait for a reaction. He was already out the door, leaving the disgraced manager to collapse in the ruins of his tiny kingdom. The address led him to a rundown apartment building in a part of the city he hadn't seen since his company was just a dream. The paint was peeling, and the air smelled of damp concrete and boiled cabbage. He climbed 4 flights of stairs, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. He knocked on the door of apartment 4B. After a long moment, the door opened a crack, held by a flimsy security chain. Elara peered out, her eyes wide and fearful. She looked even smaller and more fragile without her uniform. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She thought he was here to complain further, perhaps to sue her for some imagined offense. "Miss Elara," he began, his own voice sounding strange and formal in the narrow hallway. "My name is Khalid Al-Jamil. I owe you an apology." He held out the piece of the napkin. "I behaved abominably yesterday. There is no excuse for my rudeness, or for what that man did to you. I am deeply sorry." Elara stared at him, then at the piece of paper, her mind struggling to process his words. She slowly unlatched the chain and opened the door. Her apartment was tiny, but clean. A small table was covered in sketches, and a single canvas on an easel held an unfinished, breathtaking painting of a desert sunrise. Art was everywhere, bursting from the seams of her small, impoverished life. "I came for this," he said, gesturing with the napkin piece. "The other half." He watched as a complex series of emotions played across her face: suspicion, fear, confusion, and then a flicker of something he hadn't seen before, a spark of defiance. She deserved to be angry. He had humiliated her. He braced himself for her to slam the door in his face. Instead, she turned and walked over to a small wastebasket. She reached in and pulled out 2 crumpled, torn pieces of paper. Marcus had apparently tossed them after all, and she had retrieved them. A small, silent act of reclaiming what was hers. She smoothed them out on her small table, the 2 halves of her falcon. Mr. Aljamil stepped inside, carefully placing his half next to hers, fitting the torn edges together. The falcon was whole. And it was magnificent. Simple, elegant, powerful. It was everything he had been searching for. This, he said, his voice filled with a reverence that stunned her into silence. This is the soul of my company. I lost it, and you found it. He looked up from the napkin and met her eyes. I want you to present this design to my board of directors. I will pay you a consulting fee, of course, a generous one. I will give you all the resources you need. Alara simply stared at him, speechless. The most powerful man she had ever met was standing in her tiny apartment, apologizing, and offering her the chance of a lifetime, all because of a doodle on a napkin. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they were not tears of shame. They were tears of a hope so fierce and unexpected it felt like pain. She thought of the art school she had to leave, of the crushing weight of her family's debt, of the dream she thought was dead and buried. And in that moment, looking at the determined face of the man who had laughed at her, she found her voice. Okay, she said, the words small but solid. Okay. I'll do it. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Khalid Al-Jamil was true to his word. He moved Alara from the cramped apartment into a suite at a luxury hotel. He cleared out a conference room on the top floor of the Al-Jamil Tower and turned it into a state-of-the-art design studio just for her. She had access to every tool, every resource she could imagine. But more importantly, she had his time. They spent hours together, not just talking about the logo, but about everything. He told her about his father, about the early days of the company, about the principles of integrity and vision that had been its bedrock. She, in turn, told him about her grandfather's stories, about her passion for art, and about the struggles that had nearly extinguished it. An unlikely friendship formed between the billionaire CEO and the former waitress, forged in a shared purpose. He saw in her a purity of vision he had long since lost, and she saw in him a man burdened by his own success, desperate to reconnect with what truly mattered. He was not just a catalyst for her, she was becoming one for him, reigniting the fire in his own heart. But the rest of the company was not so easily won over. The whispers started almost immediately. Who was this girl? Why was the CEO spending all his time with her? Ferris, his second in command and the primary antagonist on the board, was openly contemptuous. He saw Alara as a threat, an embarrassment, an emotional whim of a CEO he believed was losing his grip. He worked behind the scenes, sowing seeds of doubt among the other board members. He's lost his mind, Ferris would say in hushed tones in the executive lounge. He's staking the future of a $10 billion company on a scribble from a coffee shop girl. It's sentimentality, not strategy. He'll make us a laughingstock. Alara felt the hostility. In the hallways, executives in sharp suits would look through her. In meetings, they would address their questions to Mr. Al-Jamil, as if she weren't even in the room. The old feelings of invisibility and worthlessness tried to creep back in. But this time was different. She wasn't alone. Khalid stood by her, a bulwark against the tide of cynicism. Don't listen to them, Alara, he told her one evening as they looked over her refined sketches. They have forgotten that this company was built on a dream, not a balance sheet. You are reminding them. That frightens them. His belief in her became her own. She poured all her pain, her hope, and her talent into the presentation. She didn't just digitize the napkin drawing. She built a world around it. She created a brand story that spoke of heritage, of connection, of looking to the future without forgetting the past. She worked day and night, fueled by coffee and the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that this was her one chance to reclaim her life. The day of the board meeting arrived like a judgment. The boardroom was an intimidating space, a long, polished table surrounded by grim-faced, powerful people who held her future in their hands. She stood at the front, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Mr. Al-Jamil gave her a small, reassuring nod from his seat at the head of the table. She took a deep breath and began. She didn't start with market analytics or demographic charts. She started with a story. "My grandfather," she said, her voice shaking slightly at first, then growing stronger, "told me that the falcon does not just fly. It dances with the wind. It sees not just the prey below, but the shape of the world. It is a symbol of vision, yes, but also of a deep connection to the world that soars above." She clicked to the first slide. It wasn't a logo. It was a picture of her original napkin, torn and coffee-stained. This is where it began. Not in a boardroom, but in a moment of honesty. This company, Al-Jamil Holdings, didn't begin as a global entity. It began as a promise between a father and a son. A promise to see further, to connect people, to build something that lasts. She then revealed her design. It was the falcon from the napkin, now perfectly rendered. It was simple yet profound. The single, unbroken line conveyed both elegance and strength. The eye was sharp, but not predatory. It was a symbol of a guardian, not a conqueror. "This," she said, her voice ringing with passion, "is not just a logo. It is a reminder. A promise to your customers, your employees, and to yourselves, that you will never forget the heart that beats at the center of this empire." A stunned silence filled the room. The board members were captivated, not just by the design, but by the raw, heartfelt conviction in her voice. And then, Ferris spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's a very touching story, miss." He deliberately forgot her name. "But we are not in the business of telling fairy tales. We are in the business of $10 billion of shareholder value. That drawing is naive. It's primitive. Our competitors will laugh at us. It lacks the aggressive, forward momentum our brand requires." He turned to the rest of the board. "Are we really going to throw away millions in professional market research for a sentimental doodle?" The spell was broken. Doubt began to creep back onto the faces around the table. They were businessmen, and Ferris was speaking their language, the language of fear and profit. Alara's heart sank. She had failed. Just as Ferris was about to press his attack, Khalid Al-Jamil stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The sheer force of his presence commanded the room. "You are wrong, Ferris," he said, his gaze sweeping over every member of the board. "You are the one who is being naive. You believe that power comes from aggression, that profit comes from a cold, calculated image. You are wrong. Our profits have been stagnant for 2 years precisely because we have become what you are advocating for, a company with a brilliant mind but no soul." He walked to the front of the room and stood beside Alara, a gesture of unwavering solidarity. "This logo," he said, pointing to her design, "is the most powerful thing I have seen in a decade. Why? Because it is honest. It is human. In a world of artificial, corporate noise, this speaks the truth. It reminds me of my father. It reminds me of why I get up every single morning. It has momentum, Ferris, the momentum of purpose." He looked directly at his cynical second-in-command. "You say our competitors will laugh? Let them laugh. They will laugh all the way to their own irrelevance, while we reconnect with our customers on a level they have forgotten exists. We are not just selling products. We are selling trust. And this," he tapped the screen, "this is what trust looks like." He returned to his seat. "We will vote. All those in favor of adopting Miss Alara's design as the new global symbol of Al-Jamil Holdings, raise your hand." He raised his own hand high, his eyes challenging the others. For a long moment, nobody moved. Ferris sat with his arms crossed, a smug look on his face. Then, an elderly board member, a man who had known Khalid's father, slowly raised his hand. Then another. And another. One by one, inspired by their leader's conviction and moved by Alara's authenticity, the hands went up, until only Ferris was left, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. The vote was nearly unanimous. Elara felt a wave of dizziness wash over her as the reality of what had just happened settled in. She had won. Her little drawing, her hidden dream, was about to become the face of a global empire. After the vote, Mr. Al-Jamil made one final announcement. Due to information that has recently come to light regarding Marcus, the former manager of the Daily Grind, and his attempts to actively sabotage this process by feeding misinformation to members of this board. He paused, letting his eyes rest on Ferris, who shrank in his seat. We have terminated his employment, and we will be re-evaluating certain executive positions to ensure our leadership aligns with our renewed company values. The message was clear. The era of cynicism was over. 6 months later, the city looked different. Elara's falcon was everywhere. It adorned the side of the Al-Jamil Tower, a graceful, powerful symbol against the sky. It was on their products, in their advertisements, on the uniforms of their employees. The change was more than aesthetic. The company felt different. Morale was at an all-time high. A new sense of pride and purpose pulsed through the organization. The market had responded with overwhelming positivity. The stock price soared. Al-Jamil Holdings was not just a company anymore. It was a brand people loved, a brand they trusted. Elara was no longer a waitress. She was the head of the newly created Department of Brand Integrity, a position Mr. Al-Jamil had created just for her. Her job was to ensure the company never lost its soul again. She led initiatives that invested in communities, sponsored young artists, and championed ethical practices. She had not just changed a logo, she had started a revolution of conscience within the company. One evening, she stood with Khalid on the balcony of his office, looking out at the city lights. Their falcon glowed softly on the building opposite them. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The anonymity? Just drawing on napkins in a cafe?" He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "I miss the man I was before I forgot what mattered," he replied. "You didn't just give me a new logo, Elara. You gave me my company back. You gave me my father's legacy back. For that, I can never repay you." She shook her head. "You did the same for me, Khalid. You saw something in me when no one else did, not even myself." They stood in comfortable silence, two unlikely friends who had found each other in the most unexpected of ways. "So I ask you again, who are the invisible people in your life? The ones who serve you, clean for you, the ones who pass you on the street? What dreams are they holding in their hearts? What masterpieces are they hiding on a crumpled napkin? Look closer. Listen harder. Because true value, real vision, is often not found in the places we are told to look. It's found in the quiet corners, in the humble hands, in the honest hearts of those we so often overlook. The world is full of hidden genius. All we have to do is be willing to see it. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that their talent matters, that their voice deserves to be heard, no matter who they are. Remind them, and yourself, that a simple act of creation can change the world.